Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into an incredibly unexpected, honestly kind of mind-bending collision of ideas. We're going to explore what actually happens when an ultra-modern educational framework, one designed specifically to help young people survive the AI era, borrows its core mechanics from some of the absolute oldest philosophical and spiritual traditions on Earth. It's this fascinating overlap where ancient wisdom, we're talking Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, and Taoist thought, meets modern secular cognitive science. And it's all colliding inside something called the Open PMC Protocol. But first, are you living intentionally, or are you just running on a script? It's a deeply personal question, right? Think about your own life for just a second. You know those days where you wake up, scroll on your phone, go through the motions at school or work, come home, scroll some more, and suddenly the whole week is just over? You were entirely physically present, but mentally? Mentally, you were basically just executing a background program. Our source material calls this drift. It's the default state of unreflective, unconscious living. And it is the central, nagging problem that both ancient monks and modern educators are desperately trying to solve. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our structured roadmap for today. 1. Traditions already understand awakening. 2. Paths to intentional living. 3. Resonances with Open PMC. 4. Navigating the deeper tensions. 5. Algorithmic drift threat. And finally, 6. Guided versus algorithm-led examination. So to ground our conversation, we first really need to define this modern framework our source material is evaluating, the Open PMC Protocol. Its core goal is moving learners from an NPC, a non-player character state of unconscious drift, into a PC, a player character state of intentional living. Now, if you've ever played a video game, you know the NPCs, right? They're the background characters just repeating the exact same program dialogue over and over. They have absolutely no agency. Giving a teenager the vocabulary of a game of life is a brilliantly simple psychological tool. It literally hands them the controller. It challenges them to grab the steering wheel of their own development rather than just letting algorithms or social pressures dictate their next move.
All right, part 1, traditions already understand awakening, ancient wisdom from modern problems.
So what happens when this modern NPC to PC vocabulary is introduced to families deeply rooted in ancient traditions? Well, the source points out something incredible. These major faiths are built on the exact same recognition that humans default to unconscious living. The modern concept of the AI era drift state maps almost flawlessly onto the ancient Hindu description of Maya. Maya is the veil of illusion. It's this innate human tendency to mistake the shadows on the wall for reality itself, getting completely absorbed in the superficial drama of daily life while ignoring much deeper truths. For thousands of years, Hindu philosophy has recognized this unreflective conformity. So this modern framework isn't introducing a new problem to these communities, it's simply giving a new vocabulary for a very, very old one. And, the exact same profound alignment appears in Buddhism. The modern NPC state is essentially what Buddhist teaching calls samsara, or avidya, which is this endless cycle of unconscious, driven existence. In the 21st century, this unconscious craving is literally everywhere. It's the automatic reach for your phone to get a dopamine hit, the unexamined obsession with getting the next perfect grade, or buying the next product just to feel complete. Buddhism's entire framework begins with the recognition that humans default to suffering through exactly this kind of automatic, unexamined craving. Both systems, ancient and modern, share the exact same starting line, waking the individual up from that hypnotic drift. Which takes us to Section 2, Paths to Intentional Living. Let's look at how different traditions actually seek this awakening. The sheer variety of active methodologies these diverse traditions use to guide people toward an intentional life is just beautiful. For instance, Jainism utilizes anekantavada, which is an intellectual doctrine of many-sidedness, combining it with deep ethical restraint, where the absolute quality of your intention is everything. Taoism, on the other hand, seeks wu-wei, translating to effortless action. Think of a surfer perfectly riding a wave rather than exhausting themselves fighting the ocean's current. It's about breaking free from rigid social conventions to genuinely align with nature. And even from a strictly secular cognitive science perspective, it's about moving from Daniel Kahneman's System 1, our fast, automated, impulsive thinking, into a deliberate, examined System 2 agency. You are literally teaching the brain to hit the brakes.
Moving to Section 3, Resonances with Open PMC. A shared diagnosis and remedy.
And this brilliantly illustrates a wonderful, almost hilarious irony in the core thesis of our source material. Because whether you're coming from a Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Taoist, or purely secular humanist perspective, the shared remedy for human drift is exactly the same. Thousands of years of monastic tradition and a modern secular AI-era protocol ended up with the exact same homework assignment, a structured encounter with challenge and self-examination to produce a more awake person. The absolute key word here is structured. You can't just stumble into enlightenment or agency, right? It requires an intentional scaffolding. The Open PMC Protocol is simply providing the structural conditions for this deep self-examination, but doing it in a format that actually appeals to a modern teenager.
Let's tackle Section 4, navigating the deeper tensions. We need to talk about ego, obligation, detachment, and systemization.
Now, obviously, applying a Silicon Valley-style game framework to ancient religions creates some incredibly sharp philosophical friction. A Buddhist parent might rightly be concerned that treating life like a game to be won just reinforces the very ego-driven attachment they're trying to eliminate. A Hindu parent might worry that hyper-focusing on choosing your individual path could give a teenager license to abandon sacred duties and family obligations. And a Taoist faces the ultimate paradox. If you heavily systematize a protocol for awakening, aren't you really just replacing a societal script with a new, equally rigid educational script? The source text tackles these legitimate concerns neutrally, framing the modern protocol not as an ego trip or a victory narrative, but purely as an initial, temporary scaffold to help a young person build a capacity for conscious obligation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the framework actually resolves those deep tensions, and it relies entirely on modularity. It is essentially an educational chassis where families and communities can install their own metaphysical engine. A community can strip out the gaming vocabulary entirely if they want to. A Hindu mentoring cell can use the language of moving from Maya to dharmic living through karma yoga. A Buddhist cell uses avidya and sadhana. A secular cell uses System 1, System 2, and inquiry. The structure of challenging the student remains perfectly intact, but the profound underlying meaning is dictated by the deeply authentic traditions of the community itself. On to Section 5, Algorithmic Drift Threat, the common AI age enemy. Listen to this quote for a second. The platforms your child uses are not neutral environments. They are active systems optimized to capture and shape attention, identity, and desire. This right here is the ultimate modern drift state. It is vital to understand that a social media feed is fundamentally a counter-religion. Algorithms do not care about a teenager's spiritual development, their cognitive agency, or their metaphysical commitments. They optimize purely for engagement, keeping the user in a perpetual state of desire and distraction. This digital capture actively preys on the unexamined mind, pulling the secular student and the religious student equally into the exact same automated void. Finally, Section 6, Guided versus Algorithm-Led Examination, the ultimate choice. So the crucial point is this. Every single teenager is eventually going to face an existential crisis where they question their inherited beliefs. That friction, it's totally inevitable. The only actual choice parents and educators have is where and how that worldview examination happens. Will it happen through guided examination, sitting at a table in a warm, supportive, mentor-led environment? Or will it be an algorithm-led awakening, happening alone at 2 a.m., bathed in the cold blue light of a screen, driven by a platform that has absolutely zero interest in that young person's human flourishing? When you frame it that way, the necessity of a structured, intentional intervention becomes pretty undeniable. So I want to leave you with this. If a young person is supported in stepping out of the drift state, if they're guided to rigorously examine their inherited beliefs, not through manipulative algorithms, but through intentional challenge and deep reflection, what does it mean for them to finally, consciously choose their own tradition? And what kind of person does that deliberate, examined choice actually produce?